You ever notice how Demon Slayer makes you cheer for something that deep down feels wrong? Because I did. Right around the moment, I realized the Demon Slayer core doesn't recruit heroes, it manufactures them. Think about it. Traumatized kids, ritualized trials, devotion that looks a little too much like worship. It's not hero training, it's indoctrination. And the scariest part? The show makes us love it. Stay tuned as I expose the child soldier cult hiding behind Demon Slayer's epic fights and why we're all cheering for the trap.
Today, 鬼殺隊最終選別にお集まりくださって、鬼殺の剣士様方が生け捕りにした鬼が閉じ込められており、この中で7日間生き抜く、それが最終選別の合格条件でございます。いってらっしゃいませ。
Section 1. The Architecture of Indoctrination. Every successful cult needs 3 fundamental elements: a compelling origin story that captures the imagination, an unquestionable enemy that unites followers in shared purpose, and a belief system that demands nothing less than absolute devotion. The Demon Slayer core checks all these boxes with disturbing efficiency, operating like a religious order disguised as a military organization. The foundation myth centers around the unparalleled mastery of the first breathing technique, sun breathing, created by the legendary Yoriichi Tsujikuni, imbuing their fighting methods with an almost religious reverence that transcends mere combat training. This isn't just about learning sword techniques. It's about inheriting sacred knowledge passed down through generations, complete with ritualistic elements like the specific breathing patterns and the mystical properties of Nichirin blades that blur the line between science and faith. The techniques themselves are treated with the kind of reverence typically reserved for religious scripture. Every movement carries spiritual weight, every lesson becomes doctrine, and every practitioner transforms from student to disciple. I can't shake the thought that this reverence feels like a trap, pulling you in with beauty before locking you into obedience. What strikes me most about this system is how it mirrors real-world indoctrination techniques with chilling accuracy. The core doesn't just recruit fighters, they manufacture devotees through carefully designed psychological manipulation that would make any cult leader proud. Consider how new recruits are introduced to the organization. They don't simply sign up for military service or receive basic training like conventional armies. Instead, they undergo an intense initiation process that systematically breaks down their individual identities while rebuilding them around the core's mission, transforming personal motivations into unwavering institutional loyalty. Take Tanjiro's journey as a perfect example of this process in action. After his family's brutal massacre, he's not offered therapy, alternative career paths, or even adequate time to properly process his trauma. Instead, he's immediately funneled into a system that reframes his grief as a divine calling, his desire for revenge as righteous purpose, and his desperate need for answers as something that can only be satisfied through total commitment to the core's holy war. I find myself empathizing deeply with Tanjiro's pain, yet I'm horrified by how his vulnerability is weaponized, something that feels all too familiar in stories of real-world exploitation. It's the kind of psychological manipulation that takes a grieving child and transforms him into a willing martyr who genuinely believes his suffering serves a greater purpose. The organization swoops in during his most vulnerable moment and provides structure, meaning, and direction, classic cult recruitment tactics that exploit psychological weakness for institutional gain. The final selection exam serves as perhaps the most brutal initiation ritual imaginable, testing recruits' resolve while forging their identities around the core's mission through shared trauma and survival. Throwing children onto a demon-infested mountain for 7 days isn't just training. It's a calculated psychological ordeal designed to deepen their emotional investment through blood, sweat, and terror. The final selection exam is literally designed to kill most participants, and everyone just accepts this as normal. Imagine explaining this to someone outside the system. Yeah, we take traumatized teenagers, train them for a few years, then send them into a mountain full of demons and see who survives. The ones who make it out get swords and assignments. The ones who don't, well, at least they died for the cause. As Alphonse Elric once said, humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something in return. To obtain, something of equal value must be lost. And what the core demands in exchange for membership is nothing less than recruits' former selves, their childhood innocence, and often their lives. That quote hits me hard. It reminds me of how often we lose parts of ourselves to systems that demand everything, and I wonder if the core's price is too steep. Those who survive don't just pass a test, they emerge fundamentally transformed, having proven their willingness to die for the cause while forming unbreakable bonds with fellow survivors. The core doesn't create ordinary soldiers. It manufactures true believers who've literally shed blood for their membership and watched peers die for the same ideals. This shared trauma creates an us versus them mentality that makes questioning the organization feel like betraying fallen comrades, effectively turning grief into a weapon of control. What makes this indoctrination particularly insidious is how skillfully it's wrapped in seemingly noble ideals and moral clarity. The core doesn't tell recruits they're joining a death cult or signing their lives away to an organization that treats them as expendable assets. Instead, they're told they're becoming humanity's protectors, guardians standing between innocent people and monstrous threats. This moral framing creates a psychological trap that makes it nearly impossible for members to question the organization's methods, leadership, or tactics without feeling like they're betraying defenseless civilians. How do you criticize an institution that claims to be saving lives? How do you express doubt about tactics when you've been conditioned to believe that hesitation equals complicity in civilian deaths? These questions haunt me, because I see parallels in our own world where good intentions are used to silence valid critiques, and it makes me question how often we fall into similar traps. The genius of this system lies in how it intertwines personal motivations with institutional goals, creating a feedback loop where individual desires become inseparable from organizational objectives. Members don't just fight for the core, they fight for their murdered families, their dead friends, their own sense of purpose and identity. Questioning the mission means questioning everything they've built their new lives around, everything that gives their suffering meaning. This psychological framework ensures absolute loyalty by making dissent feel like a fundamental betrayal of humanity itself, not just organizational insubordination. It's a masterclass in emotional manipulation that would be impressive if it weren't so deeply disturbing. Transforming traumatized children into fanatically devoted warriors who genuinely believe their sacrifice serves a greater good while never questioning whether that good justifies the methods used to achieve it. I'm left grappling with the moral ambiguity here. How can something so noble in intent feel so wrong in execution? The Demon Slayer Corps may be fighting genuine monsters, but their methods of creating monster fighters raise serious questions about the price of that protection and whether the cure might be as dangerous as the disease itself. As I sit with these thoughts, I'm struck by how this story forces me to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of fighting for what's right, or what we're told is right.
聞いてないこんなの聞いてないぞなんで大型の異形がいるんだよ聞いてないこんなの食われたひるむな助けろ助けろ助けろ水の呼吸二の型水車
Section 2, An Army of Child Soldiers. As I reflect on the darker layers beneath Demon Slayer's world, perhaps nothing exposes the core's cult-like nature more clearly than their systematic recruitment and exploitation of children. While the anime presents this through a lens of admirable determination and youthful heroism, the reality underneath is deeply disturbing. The kind that makes you uncomfortable when you actually stop to think about what you're watching. The core specifically targets traumatized minors, children who've lost everything and are desperate for purpose and belonging. These aren't adults making informed decisions about military service, weighing pros and cons with life experience to guide them. These are damaged kids being offered a chance to transform their pain into power, and when you're that young and that hurt, you'll grab onto anything that promises meaning. It reminds me of how organizations prey on vulnerability in the real world. You know that feeling when you're at your lowest, and someone offers you exactly what you need to hear? That's when critical thinking goes out the window. The core understands this psychology perfectly, and they weaponize it. Look at the ages of the main characters. Tanjiro is 15 when he begins his journey. 15, an age that strikes me as absurdly young for what he faces, the age when most kids are worried about school exams and maybe their first crush. Inosuke is also 15. Zenitsu is 16, barely old enough to drive in most countries, yet he's expected to decapitate demons in the dead of night. And Nezuko? She's 12 when she's turned into a demon. 12. That's middle school age. The Hashira. Presented as the pinnacle of the Corps' achievements, the absolute elite warriors who've mastered their craft include members like Muichiro, who became a Hashira at just 14 years old. 14. Think about the 14-year-olds, you know. Now, imagine them as the elite warriors of a secretive military organization, bearing the weight of protecting humanity from supernatural threats. This isn't a coincidence or a quirk of the story. It's a systematic pattern that reveals the Corps' true nature. From my point of view, they recruit children because their desperation and malleability make them ideal candidates to embrace the Corps' demanding mission, often sacrificing themselves without hesitation. Adults ask questions. Adults have perspective. Adults might say, wait, is this actually worth dying for? But kids who've just watched demons tear their families apart, they'll do anything you tell them if you promise them revenge wrapped up as justice. It's exploitation dressed as empowerment, and the Corps has perfected this formula over generations. The training process mirrors an unforgiving regimen that molds children into dedicated warriors, prioritizing Corps loyalty over personal well-being in a manner that echoes extreme organizational conditioning. Think about what we actually see. Children are isolated from normal society, cut off from anything resembling a regular childhood. They're subjected to extreme physical and psychological stress, training that would break most adults. They're taught that their worth is measured entirely by their willingness to fight and die, that the greatest honor they can achieve is a heroic death in battle. When your entire value system is built around how effectively you can throw yourself at demons, that's not healthy development. That's indoctrination. The Corps doesn't prepare these kids for life after demons are defeated. They prepare them only for battle and death. There's no retirement plan, no career counseling, no discussion of what happens when the war ends, because the organization can only function if its members believe the war will never end. And honestly, I think the leadership knows this. They've built an entire system that requires a constant supply of young warriors willing to die. And the moment these kids start thinking about the future, about life beyond the mission, the whole thing falls apart. It's reminiscent of those stories where organizations create the very problems they claim to solve, except the Corps didn't create demons. They just created a system that requires a constant supply of young people willing to die fighting them. Even more troubling is how the anime romanticizes this exploitation, and I say this as someone who genuinely enjoys Demon Slayer. The animation is gorgeous, the fights are spectacular, the emotional beats hit hard. But that's exactly the problem. We're meant to admire these young warriors for their dedication, to find it inspiring rather than tragic that children are throwing their lives away. The show frames their sacrifices as noble, their determination as admirable, their willingness to die as the ultimate expression of heroism. And it works. I've caught myself rooting for them, swept up in the spectacle, before remembering how young they actually are. The Corps has so successfully normalized child soldiers within the narrative that audiences rarely question why 15-year-olds are being sent to fight monsters that trained adults struggle to defeat. Recall when Rengoku faces Upper Moon 3, a scene that devastated me emotionally but also proved a crucial point. A grown man with years of experience nearly dies, and does die, but we send teenagers against these same threats and frame it as normal. It's presented as necessity, someone has to fight the demons, and these kids volunteered. But this necessity is perpetuated by the Corps' reliance on sacrificial strategies that prioritize immediate demon slaying over long-term sustainability. They throw bodies at the problem, young bodies, because they can always recruit more traumatized kids. There's no shortage of demon attack survivors desperate for purpose. The system feeds itself, and this cyclical nature is what I find most chilling. Demons create traumatized children, the Corps recruits traumatized children, those children fight demons, often dying in the process, creating more traumatized survivors to recruit. It's a cycle that benefits the organization's continued existence, even as it destroys the individuals within it. And here's the thing that really gets me. The story occasionally seems aware of how messed up this is, but then pulls back from truly examining it. We get moments of characters feeling the weight of loss, wondering if the sacrifice is worth it. But these moments are always resolved by doubling down on the mission, by reaffirming that yes, actually it is worth it to die at 16 if you take a demon with you. The narrative never seriously entertains the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there's something fundamentally wrong with a system built on child sacrifice. It never asks whether an organization that can only function by consuming the youth and trauma of children deserves to exist, even if its stated mission is righteous. Because that's the insidious thing about cults and cult-like organizations. They take something genuinely good, protecting people from demons, and use it to justify something deeply wrong, sending children to die. And they do it so effectively that both the participants and the audience accept it as not just necessary, but admirable. The core has weaponized these children's trauma and idealism, pointed them at demons, and convinced everyone, including us watching, that this is heroism rather than exploitation. And when I realize that, I'm left with an uncomfortable truth. Maybe the demons weren't the only monsters in this story after all.
死んでしまうぞ教授の煉獄さんもういいですから呼吸で止血してください
ない。俺はもうすぐに死ぬ。俺がここで死ぬことは気にするな。心を燃やせ。
Section 3. Death as the ultimate devotion. The most damning evidence of the core's cult-like nature lies in their relationship with death and martyrdom. Healthy military organizations, even those facing existential threats, work to minimize casualties and preserve their members' lives. The Demon Slayer Corps does the opposite. It glorifies death in battle and treats survival as almost secondary to displaying proper devotion to the cause. Think about it this way. When you join a real military, they invest in keeping you alive. They give you armor, backup, medical support, extraction plans. They want you to come home because training you costs resources, and losing you means losing that investment. But the Demon Slayer Corps? They hand children swords and basically say, good luck out there. It's less like joining an army and more like signing up for a suicide pact with extra steps. This death obsession permeates every level of the organization, seeping into the bones of the institution like poison. New recruits are taught that dying in battle against demons is the highest honor they can achieve, not surviving, not living long enough to train the next generation. Just dying well. The final selection doesn't just test combat ability, it normalizes the idea that death is an acceptable, even expected outcome of core membership. It's packaged as a rite of passage, but let's call it what it really is. A massacre with a participant ribbon. Imagine a mountain crawling with demons, a bunch of kids with little battle experience and zero adult supervision. Many recruits don't survive their first real mission, and this isn't treated as a tragic failure of training or preparation, it's treated as noble sacrifice. No one asks why so many die. No one questions whether sending barely trained teenagers into demon-infested territory might be, I don't know, a terrible idea. Instead, their deaths become folklore, cautionary tales that somehow inspire more kids to throw themselves into the meat grinder. It's a perpetual motion machine powered by child casualties. The whole setup reminds me of how organizations in anime treat their disposable soldiers, except here, nobody seems to notice they're disposable. It's normalized to the point where even the survivors don't question it. They've internalized the message so completely that they'd probably defend the system that nearly killed them. I find it deeply troubling that the Hashira system reinforces this toxic relationship with mortality in ways that should make anyone uncomfortable. These elite fighters aren't just skilled warriors. They're living martyrs who've proven their devotion by surviving long enough to develop incredible power, often at enormous personal cost. Look at their stories, really look at them. Rengoku watched his mother die and built his entire identity around being strong enough to protect others, pushing himself to the breaking point again and again. Sanemi survived his own mother turning into a demon and killing his siblings, then built a personality out of rage and self-destruction. Giyu carries survivor's guilt like a second skin, believing he doesn't deserve to be alive when others died. Their backstories read like a catalog of trauma and loss, and rather than receiving help processing these experiences, They're celebrated for channeling their pain into ever greater fighting ability. There's no therapy, no healthy coping mechanisms, just turn your trauma into a breathing technique and get back out there. The message is clear. Your suffering only has value if you can transform it into service to the core. Your pain isn't something to heal from, it's fuel for the fire. It's almost poetic how twisted it is. The organization takes broken people and breaks them further in the name of making them stronger. And here's the thing that really gets me. The Hashira themselves don't see anything wrong with this. What I've come to realize is that they're so deep in the ideology that they genuinely believe this is just how things have to be. They look at new recruits and see future versions of themselves, and instead of warning them away, they push them forward. It's not malicious. It's worse than that. It's sincere. They truly believe that the only path worth walking is one that ends in death by demon. Perhaps most disturbing is how the core treats actual death when it inevitably comes. When members die in battle, their sacrifice is immediately mythologized and used to inspire others to similar devotion. There's a script for it, practically. Someone dies, everyone reflects on their noble spirit for about 30 seconds, and then it's weaponized. They died protecting others. Can you do any less? What becomes clear to me is that there's no time for proper mourning, no questioning whether their deaths could have been prevented, no examining whether the strategies that led to their deaths might need revision. Instead, death becomes recruitment material, proof of the righteousness of the cause, and inspiration for the next generation of potential martyrs. In my view, it's the kind of circular logic that keeps destructive systems running. We fight because others died because they fought. We must keep fighting to honor their deaths, which means more people will die, which means we must keep fighting on and on forever. The machine feeds itself. As Rengoku said in his final moment,
"Set your heart ablaze."
And the core took that literally, encouraging every member to burn themselves out completely in service of the mission. They turned a dying man's encouragement into a philosophy of self-immolation. This creates a feedback loop where the organization's survival depends on a steady stream of willing sacrifices. Think about the math here. The core can't allow its members to develop healthy relationships with mortality because that would undermine the very foundation of their operational strategy. If people started prioritizing survival, started questioning missions, started asking, is this worth dying for? The whole thing collapses. They need true believers who see death in battle not as a tragic outcome to be avoided, but as a glorious culmination of their purpose. It seems to me that it's a system that can't afford doubters, can't afford people who want to live past 25, can't afford members who might look at a mission and say, this isn't smart, we need a better plan. Because the moment you inject pragmatism into martyrdom, it stops being martyrdom and starts being waste. And if it's waste, then all those previous deaths become harder to justify, and the whole narrative unravels. The tragedy isn't that demons are evil or that someone needs to fight them. Of course someone does. Evil exists and must be opposed. That's not the issue. The tragedy is that the Demon Slayer core has created a system that consumes the very people it claims to protect, turning traumatized children into willing martyrs for a cause that offers them no future beyond death in battle. They recruit the broken, promise them purpose, and deliver them to early graves. They've built their heroism on the bones of the young and called it noble. And perhaps most unervingly of all, they've made us cheer for it. We watch these stories unfold. We cry when characters die, we celebrate their noble sacrifices, and we rarely stop to ask if there might have been another way. The narrative sweeps us along just like it sweeps along the characters themselves, until we're complicit in the same machine that grinds them down. We've been recruited too, in a way, enlisted into believing this is just how stories of heroism have to go. The core doesn't save people from demons. It saves demons from having to hunt. It delivers victims directly, wrapped in the banner of duty and honor. And somehow, they've convinced everyone that this is what heroism looks like. Maybe that's the real horror. That even knowing all this, part of me still wants to believe in them.